Where was God this week at Frankfurt Junction when the Amtrak train went off the rails and 8 people died and hundreds were wounded? I have been asked that question in the last couple of days more than any time since the last big tragedy, when people seem to ask that question. And I'm going to be really honest. One response I feel when I get asked that question, where was God, is really? That's the question you want to know? Where was God? Do you ask that question? O questioner, where was God when healthy babies are born? Do you ask that question when parents hug their kids? Do you ask that question when people make love? Do you ask that question when peace treaties are signed? Or the hungry are inexplicably fed with seemingly few resources? See, I guess if we're going to ask where God is, we've got to ask where God is at every moment, for good and for bad. But I understand that's really not what we're asking, me either, when I ask where was God. We're asking for an explanation of the otherwise inexplicably bad, because we really want good to win out. And that's a beautiful thing about us. We expect the good, and we see the bad as abnormal. And it really is a great trait, as long as we don't get depressed when the bad stuff happens. Because, as I have learned, normal is not the same as good. Normal is the mix of the very best and the very worst as we spin through our lives. But I'll try and answer the question, where was God? One answer, doesn't work for a lot of people, not even sure it works for me. God was right there making it all happen. And it's all part of some larger divine plan. And those 8 people were meant to die, and those hundreds were meant to be injured. Like I said, doesn't work for a lot of people, doesn't really work for me. But I've learned to accept how much healing and comfort can come to those for whom that approach does work. And so while I don't try and sell it or preach it, I also have learned to respect it. If it works for you, great. Where was God? Perhaps, as the psalmist says, God was right there suffering with those who suffered. God is wherever people discover the sense that no matter what, we are never alone. Where was God? God was right there with all the people who tried to make that night a little better, a little safer, a little easier. God is with us anytime we reach out to anyone who's having a hard time. And in our compassion, we argue the presence of a compassionate God back into reality. I'm sure there are other answers, but those are 3 this week that seem to make a lot of sense. And in all cases, what they remind us is that the credibility of God's presence, the God we want to believe in, who is good and compassionate and caring, is often answered in our own goodness, in our own compassion, and in our own caring. So that the urgency behind that question can be answered, not only by figuring out where God is, but how we can be more godly wherever we are.